Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. As this podcast has gone global, we have a special episode with Dr. Stephen Shore. Have you ever wondered what neurodivergence looks like in different countries? Well, Dr. Stephen Shore breaks it down on this episode of Unmasking Social, where he shares his personal experiences, not just as keynote speaker in different cultures and countries around the world, but also as an observer thinking about neurodivergence and how it expresses itself in so many other countries on this planet. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today we have a second-time guest, my first second-time guest, Dr. Stephen Shore, who has made an impact in the community of autism on a global scale. Our part one really covered Dr. Shore's upbringing, from how his parents, when he was a little kid, really realized that something was different in the way he was communicating socially. And they were able to really meet his needs at that time. They were way ahead of their time, Dr. Shore, if I remember correctly. And then Dr. Shore became a professor. A lot have happened in between, and started developing all these programs that are so neuroaffirming and acknowledging each individual's potential, strengths, and interests, really embracing every individual with autism so they can do the things that they love, that they're passionate about, and that they can advocate for ultimately. Dr. Shore, first of all, thank you again for the part two. And also, did I get that? Did I miss? I think I missed a lot of the part of the journey in there. I was just trying to summarize.
No, that was good. Yeah, it was a good summary. Yeah.
Okay. All right. But for our part two, Dr. Shore, the last thing that we ended on our part one was you were telling me about different countries that you travel to. You had said that you had been to about, I think it was in the high seven.
No, not quite. It's been to 58 countries if I include, which I haven't counted, but if I include the online presentations to various countries, it could be up in the 70s, but it doesn't count if you do it online.
Oh, okay. So then, all right, depending who you ask, different perspectives, I guess.
Right.
But so what's fascinating about that is because you're doing that, you're reaching a global scale. And when I asked you, I know this is hard to choose, but what is your favorite place to visit? And you had said, as a joke, but not really a joke, you had mentioned the name of an airplane. I forgot what it was. And your favorite place to hang out is I forgot what it was, the MB, I don't know what it was.
There
What?
might have been the Airbus 380.
Yeah, what are those that you can find? People can find you there. That's usually where you're hanging out.
747. Yeah, either one.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And so after we recorded that, you then started flying out again. So could you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to? I know you were involved very significantly in projects that are happening outside of the U.S.
Right. Right. All right. So let's take it from the latest that I've been to.
Mm-hmm.
And the latest trip, literally around the world,
Wow.
was maybe about 3 weeks ago. I went from New York to Perth, Australia.
The other side of the world.
Western Australia.
Mm-hmm.
A long time to get there. So the first leg is 18 hours from New York to Auckland, New Zealand. Then another four hours to Sydney, and then another 5 hours to Perth. Perth in Australia, geographically, if you look at the map, it's somewhat analogous to San Diego. So it's south and west. And I spent about 5 days there at the Asia Pacific Autism Conference, otherwise known as APAC. They do this conference every other year because it's so big, like 1,500 people in the audience, big. And because of the pandemic, a number of conferences got blown out. And this was the first time in maybe 5 years or so that they had been able to get themselves together to organize another conference. And they did a really good job. It was one of the best organized conferences I had been to. And they had me do 3 keynotes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, quite a bit. One each day. It was a 3-day conference. So the first day I talked about the 4 A's of autism, and I might have mentioned them last time. That is when we look at the process of awareness, which we've been really good at, and we've been doing it for a couple generations, maybe more. Well, that serves as a foundation, a solid foundation for acceptance, then moving on to appreciation, and then action. What are you going to do to make those 3 previous A's work? So I did that as my opening keynote. The audience laughed and clapped, so they probably liked it.
Yeah.
The news station came by and created a 2-minute news clip interviewing me, asking me a few questions and some brief clips of my presentation. So if you want, I can send you that clip and you can put it
Yeah.
on the website. And then the next day I talked about sensory challenges, senses and sensibilities. And what I do with that presentation is I start out with an audience interactive activity so that the audience will get a visceral sense of what it's like to experience sensory overload. And that serves as a launch pad to talk about what it feels like, what it might feel like to an autistic person, and what are some strategies that we can implement to support someone who's having sensory challenges. And we also looked at some assessments of sensory processing to help give a better idea of what the person is experiencing. That was a very fun presentation. And a large part of it was that Tony Atwood was in the audience.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's a big one.
it's a big one. And he and I have known each other for a long time, and we're friends. I've been to his house in Brisbane a couple of times.
Wow.
And so I was talking about self-stimulatory behavior,
Mhm.
which we would probably be better off reframing as self-regulatory behavior
Okay.
because everybody does it, autistic or otherwise. Anyone who's bounced their leg, doodled, bites the end of their pen, play with their hair, that's all self-regulatory behavior. And you're either up-regulating because you might fall asleep, or you're regulating because maybe you're feeling a little bit anxious and the repetitive motions calm you down. So with us autistic people, since we tend to be more dysregulated than the general populations, our attempts to regulate are going to be bigger. And that's why we see, for example, autistic people flapping. It's self-regulatory. Not that there's anything wrong with it. And in fact, if you watch the game show The Price is Right,
Mm,
somebody gets called down from the audience, they're jumping and flapping and
yeah.
screaming and
Mhm.
would do any autistic person proud.
That's a good analogy.
We see this behavior in the general population, which is brings to mind another concept uh, promoted by Barry Prezant. And what
Yes.
he commonly says is that autistic behaviors are human behaviors, which they are. So
Mhm.
everything we do, the non-autistic population does. But maybe we do them a little bit more intensely or frequently. So I was talking about self-stimulatory behavior, and I remembered a story that Tony used to tell many years ago, which then I carried on and also told, where Tony consulted about a girl who would pass sand through her fingers and then watch the grains fall.
Hmm.
And she was just fascinated by that. Sort of like having an hourglass in your hand and letting a thin stream of sand fall. But for some reason, the people who were caring for her uh, didn't like that and needed to get her to stop.
Hmm.
And so they did. However, what happens is if you stop a stim, one, it's probably going to come back. Two, if it doesn't, something else, which is likely to be more disruptive, is going to come back. And so I said, Tony, do you remember that? Remember that girl with the sand, passing sand through her fingers? And he says, oh, yes, I remember. I remember well. Can you tell us about it? So he stood up and he told us the story. And we found out what the girl replaced dribbling sand with, and it's rectal digging. Not to be
Oh.
too disgusting, but that's
Oh,
what it was.
wow.
And not only that, she would eat it too. So really gross out the audience.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. And then I said, Tony, that's absolutely right, except the way you said it was rectal digging, like that,
With that nice accent over
with
there.
the
Yeah.
nice
Yeah.
accent. So I
Yeah.
did the
Better
accent.
accent. Better accent than ours. Yeah. Here in New York.
Yeah. So we all had
Yeah.
a good laugh.
But it's so crazy because I we come back to this so many times on this podcast and just in conversation as a speech and language pathologist myself about how so many individuals are dysregulated. Not
Hmm.
just the individuals with autism, as you said, even the individuals who don't have autism, the
Right.
neurotypicals, as we like to call them, have, like you said, a level of the sensory dysregulation, even just because people are on their devices so much and ADHD is on the rise. But your strategy is to allow for this to occur and to allow it to continue to occur, not to try to stop it, not to view it as some maladaptive behavior as many people assign it. Because a lot of times, what I observe is that an individual is experiencing one of these, as you said, sensory regulatory behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And because it's distracting, let's say the individual working with them or the
Hmm.
other individuals maybe that are in their class, they're told to stop. Just stop, whether it's fidgeting or maybe like you said twirling the hair or maybe sometimes a little more invasive as they get closer to somebody and they need to like knock on the desk. But then it sounds like if you try to eliminate that and treat it as a behavior, then something else will replace it. And not only that, it's going to be coming back in an exacerbated way, in a way like you just described, where it's something that's a little bit more significant, that's more difficult to navigate. And then even have you also observed maybe that if, let's say, you try to obliterate that sensory piece, do you find that if it does come back in the same form and doesn't shapeshift to something else, it comes back like kind of like in a very, very severe way where it's hard
Yeah,
to
right.
even
Yeah, it's likely that it would come back with a vengeance because you pent up
yeah,
all of this dysregulation until the person can't stand, the nervous system can't stand it anymore. Now,
right.
one thing that's also important to keep in mind is that sometimes those regulatory behaviors will be disruptive. And if that's the case, no, you still can't stop it, but you can redirect it. So, for
Mm,
example, if I have a student who's, say, flapping in my classroom and it seems to be somewhat disruptive, again, nothing wrong with flapping, but what I might try is, as I'm teaching very nonchalantly, just in the sequence of things, I'd walk over to the student with a therapy ball in my hand and I'd say, here, squeeze this. And what I've done is I've provided an alternate, a mutually exclusive behavior. You can't squeeze a ball and flap, and it provides for the sensory need because that need is going to be met whether
hmm
you want it to happen or not.
right. And yeah.
So that's what you do.
Yeah, and so I know because those fidgets, those sensory bins, there are so many of them and there's so many creative things. And I've tried to utilize them as well. Sometimes, of course, individuals need to be trained to use it, I found, because sometimes, especially if they are not used to using it as a coping strategy, they'll
Mhm.
throw it or, they'll maybe just kind of use it as something to kind of use as a connection with somebody next to them, which isn't always bad if it's connecting them with someone else and they're allowed to be social.
Right.
So they have to kind of be trained in what is the purpose of this, I find, right? Like, why are we using it? What are we using it for? Otherwise, they may not even know. And I think that's also something I've observed that has missed the mark. And so it's fascinating that you went all the way across the world to discuss this of many topics, but this was a very important one. And
Right.
it's interesting that even you said this was a collection of Asian countries, right, that were part of this conference that were attending, clearly want to learn about this.
Oh, sure.
Was there a standout moment from the culture itself? Because I know there were people from other places that were coming in, flying in,
Right.
but I'm assuming there was a large Asian representation as well, right?
Yeah, there was a large Asian representation, mostly Southeast Asia.
Mhm.
Most of the people, like with these conferences, even international conferences, most of the people there come from the country where it's hosted. So most of the
Right.
people We're Australian. Australia is a big country, kind of like the US.
Yeah.
But there were people from China and Japan and Thailand and Mongolia. There was a woman from Mongolia who spoke to me through a translator,
Wow.
who said that she came because she knew I was presenting and that she was going to find a way to bring me out to Mongolia to give a presentation.
And that would be your first time in Mongolia, right?
Right. So then I could bump the country count from 58 to 59. With,
Wow, that is so cool. Mongolia,
yeah.
I mean, that sounds like such a fascinating place. I know very little about it. I know that just from maybe history class. And when I was back in school, we learned a little bit about it. So she came just for you. So I'm so curious about the landscape of this all. So again, there's so many different cultures there. Was there a standout moment for you in terms of culture and how that played into this autism narrative, in terms of the work that they're doing maybe in a specific country, whether it was with the Mongolian woman that came over that was so eager to meet you, or maybe someone that, from Australia that really was doing cutting edge work. I'm sure there were many brilliant people
Oh,
there,
yeah,
but
there are. Well, if you want to talk about cultural contrasts, and also with contrast comes the need for cultural relevance,
yeah.
and then we have to go to India. Because after this conference, well, first of all, I did my third keynote was on community-based participatory research. And what that means is that if we're going to study autistic people, the community of autistic people, we should include autistic people in all aspects of the
Mhm.
research. So I've been doing some interesting research there on mental health and suicide prevention for autistic people. And it is this type of research, by involving autistic people in the research. One, we found out that access to mental health supports is what autistic people think is the most challenging healthcare issue. And since we know that suicide is also a leading cause of death in autistic people, it makes a lot of sense to continue the work that we were doing for measuring two suicide prevention strategies, which is a grant project that co-leading the engagement component with a colleague, Dr. Teal Benavides, to be specific, where we make sure that the autistic people who are involved are being authentically and meaningfully included in all aspects of the research. Anyways, getting to cultural differences. That conference ended and it was time to go to India.
Mm,
As I figure, well, India is sort of on the way home. Might as well drop by there. Why
yeah,
not?
just a brief stop.
Yeah. So I was there for a week. And getting to India was kind of a weird itinerary. We started in Perth, which again is like San Diego, and then flew to Melbourne. And going to Melbourne is like going to Miami.
Mhm. I was there, yeah.
Yeah. But India's in the other direction. So it'd be like flying from San Diego to Miami to go to Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
But that's just
Yeah,
how they did it. So
very indirect, yeah.
now it's India, which is a very different country. And I spent a week with the Higashi Autism School
Mm,
in Delhi. And what's interesting with that school is, as we think about the approach, the Higashi schools use an approach called daily life therapy,
mm,
which was imported from Japan. So had you gone to Japan maybe a couple of years ago, or up to about a year or so ago, you would have found this big 2,500 student elite private education school called the
hmm.
Musashino Higashi Gakuen. And this is where that um, approach, daily life therapy, was developed. And the casual observer would notice a lot of students, 2,500 students. The observer who's more familiar with autism, like you or I or others, would say, hey, wait a minute. About a third of these students are autistic and they're included with everybody else.
Mhm.
And so it was the person who developed that daily life therapy approach who decided almost 40 years ago that there should be a branch of the school in Boston.
Oh.
So they set up a branch in Boston, which still runs today. It's going very well. It's not an inclusive school. It's an 100 and I think now 92 student autistic school. And most of the students there are more or less at about level 2 and 3. As we talk about the 3 levels of autism, level 1 being a student who, with support, very well could go to university.
Right.
And at Adelphi University, we have a program specifically for supporting autistic students called Bridges to Adelphi. Is 126 students, autistic students there, and they still need support. Level 1 still needs support. And with that support, mostly everything except the academics. The academics aren't the problem. These students apply to and get in or don't get in based on their credentials. And then if they need support from the Bridges program, they go to the Bridges program, apply to that, and get the support for all the other aspects of being successful on campus. So there's very few level 1 students at the Boston Higashi School. And they focus on level 2, where more supports is needed. And as you think about speech and language, often these students, they may not speak very much. They have limited speaking ability, maybe none, and they communicate through other means, through assistive communication devices, pointing at pictures. So that's the population for this school in Boston. And their daily life therapy approach is built upon 3 pillars of physical fitness. So the day starts with a 2-mile jog around the school.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. Everybody's in shape. If the body's regulated physically, then
Mm-hmm.
we'll just be better off, autistic
Yeah.
or otherwise. Then it's emotional regulation, teaching the students strategies to regulate their emotions and perhaps applying deep pressure to themselves. They've got this interesting strategy that if a student's feeling dysregulated, we'll teach the child to, as they say, make a pose. What that means is getting down on your haunches, is really what it is. When your knees are kind of sticking up in the air and you're sitting on your heels.
Like a yoga pose of some sort, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Similar to that? Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking of a yoga pose.
And it provides, you see this pose much more often in Asian countries. In the United States, sure, everybody can make that pose too, but it's not comfortable for us because we don't grow up that way.
Right.
But you see it very often where people will be sitting in this pose for hours. And it's quite relaxing if your body has gotten used to being sitting that way.
Yeah, it sounds super uncomfortable the way you're describing it, but like you said, it takes time probably to adjust because we're not used to this Asian kind of style or form.
Yeah. So just imagine you're standing up and then you lower yourself. You don't cross your legs. You don't do a yoga pose, and what will happen is your knees end up about the level of your chin by the time you're done. And your butt is about where your ankles are. Sounds uncomfortable. But anyways, they teach these students this pose, and what this pose does is give a lot of deep pressure to a lot of the joints, and that calms them down. So that's just one example of regulatory piece. So physical education, emotional regulation, there's a lot of music. Students play a lot of music. They have a jazz band that would
Oh,
equal
that's
any other grade school jazz band, and they do a lot of artwork. And then there's the intellectual component. That's the 3rd pillar, where they school curriculum. Actually, I wonder if daily life therapy is maybe just a poor translation from Japanese because it really seems to be about balanced living. Maybe it should be called daily
mm.
balanced living.
Could you
Being more,
suggest that to them?
yeah, I've talked to them about it at Boston Higashi, but it's been daily life therapy for so long that it's just kind of stays that way. But
Yeah.
so, that's the way it is in Boston. A lot of physical exercise. And the Boston crew had to make many adjustments to make it culturally relevant to the United States. So, like in Japan, students are responsible for keeping the school clean and the upkeep. So, students learn to push a broom, keep things clean, clear dishes from the cafeteria. Some of them learn to use the dishwashing machine, loading it up. And then as they get older and transition to adulthood, it's time spent in the community doing various jobs such as food service, some more simple jobs that we see in the community. The 4 F's, I think they call it: food, flowers, Phil, and there's one more, but I forgot what it was. Anyways, so a lot of them are involved in these types of positions, and if they're happy doing it, then that's good. If they're not, then we got to find something else for them to do. But it gives you an idea of the level, the type of employment. So now we port that over to India, where Dr. Rashmi Das, who's the chairwoman of the Higashi school in India, has taken that approach and had to make it culturally relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And in India, children or adults actually don't make their bed. They
Hmm.
don't clean their home. They don't take out the trash. They don't cook.
Oh, wow. This sounds like a great
They
childhood.
don't, they don't engage in delivery of goods. Somebody else does that.
Mm-hmm.
A maid, a driver
Wow.
will do all those things. So all of those wonderful ideas and thinking of them as preparation for employment, they're just not going to work. So
Right.
it has to be made culturally relevant. And one way that the Rashmi Das has done that is having students focus on, as she calls, digital employment.
Mm.
So involvement in the computer and IT. And her goal is to make these students, who also are at about level 2, bringing their skill sets up so that they're competitive with everybody else. An interesting thing that she's also done is right now there's 40 students. She's slowly growing it to 100, but they want to grow slowly so that they make sure they support people well
Yeah.
and do what they do well. Uh, 17 of those 40 are going to take the national third grade exam.
Hmm. And wait, and
National
how old are they?
standardized third grade.
These are all third graders that are going to take the third grade
Yes,
national exam, but only the third graders are doing this.
only the third.
Okay. Is there a reason why they picked that group as a cohort?
Maybe it's their oldest group,
Oh,
because
okay.
I think what they're doing is they started from really young,
Mm-hmm.
and then every year they students continue and they move up a grade, and then
Mm-hmm.
they get new students. So year year 1 is kindergarten. Year 2, the kindergarten becomes first graders, and they take everything they learned from teaching kindergarten last year and bring in a new crop of kindergartners. So I think they're now at third grade. So
Oh,
that's
so
why.
they're going to keep building it up progressively as they get
Right.
more incoming students. Okay.
And it also may be that that's when the the national test is. Maybe it
Yeah.
is only at certain grades, maybe third and seventh or something. So this I don't know, but all I know is that 17 third graders are going to take the exam, and
Yeah.
let's see how they do.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting because I know that people have different opinions on the standardized exams because who are they culturally normed on, right? And a lot of
Right,
times they're not necessarily normed on individuals that are neurodivergent at all or anybody that isn't exactly 100% fitting into whatever it is that however you're supposed to test. So with
mhm,
that comes probably a whole set of challenges, but it
right,
is kind of fascinating that they were able to adapt from what was being done in Japan and then bring it here to Boston, which is cool because they're not doing it exactly the way Japan is doing it, but it
right,
is definitely relevant to what the kids need. I mean, the fact that they're focusing so much on the movement piece, I feel like we don't focus enough on that here, especially in New York City, which is a concrete jungle. Kids are not going
right,
outside enough. I feel like they're so dysregulated because they don't have this free time to move around and they're in such small confined spaces. So even just incorporating the movement or that Asian inspired kind of free form and just getting into different positions, I feel like is just so wonderful. But also, like you said, giving it um that edge that kind of preserves the culture of someone who is in Boston so that they could understand what they're doing and not be totally confused as this is like a foreign concept. So, are there any other programs that you have found that have been in terms of your journey? Because again, you just took a very long journey
right.
around the world, right? So, like Carmen San Diego, is there any one place that you found that really uh, also added some oomph to what we're doing here, or you feel like could really enhance what we're doing here or around the world to support individuals with autism no matter what level they're on?
Yeah, there are. And I think the way to go about it is to focus on programs as opposed to whole countries.
Mhm.
In each country, there's wide variation. So you find excellent programs in the United States, and you also find some pretty horrible programs in the United States.
Of course.
Speaking of differences, Australia does have statewide programs for neurodivergent individuals and also supporting as well as autistic individuals, I should say, and otherwise neurodivergent. And I think they have a national program too.
And they have good research out there because I remember studying amazing research from Australia, so shout out to
Right.
them. Whatever they're doing there with their research is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. So as we go to other countries, what I find is that wherever I go, there always seems to be at least one group that's engaging in either best practice or near best practice.
Mhm.
So if you go over to Russia, which I haven't been to in a while, just the way political things are,
Yeah, it's a hard
but
time.
I have gone there 10 times. And most of the time I was there with a program called Our Sunny World, run by Igor
Mhm.
Spitzberg.
Oh, yeah, I remember you mentioned this last time that apparently
Yeah,
they're doing amazing work in Russia, and I didn't even
right.
know. We don't even know what's going on over there. I mean, especially with the war and everything, people don't even know that they have a flourishing autism, lab and program.
Yeah, yeah. So they're doing great programs, and I might have mentioned last time that likewise with the Higashi School in Delhi and with Igor Spitzberg and many others, the biggest and most successful organizations are almost always started and run by parents.
Hmm.
So it really takes a parent. Rashmi Das has an autistic, almost adult son. Igor Spitzberg has an autistic, probably now adult son, since I've last seen him. And then we can think of many other organizations, such as Action for Autism, also in Delhi, run by a parent, Mary Barrera, who has an autistic son.
It
So
really
that's
takes the
interesting.
energy, the fire of a parent, I feel like, in general, to fight these battles because they're so used to advocating, just like your
Mhm.
parents did. They advocated from you from such a young age, and there were people that were telling them certain things about you, and they were clearly wrong because you developed into this huge success story in so many ways. And the way you impact everybody, I mean, everybody knows who you are, but you're also doing all this great work. But your parents knew that you had that potential, they knew that you had the ability, and they fought like hell, pardon my
Yeah,
French. And so I feel like, when we're in this field, I've also seen that parents are just always on this advocacy mode. They're always turned on, they're always tuned in. And there's this fire, this passion that I feel like you can't really get as much if you're just not a parent because you haven't
right.
lived through that experience of fighting for your child. You fought for
Oh, yeah.
other people, but not your own child. So I think
Mhm.
there is definitely a method to that, the madness of all of it. And these organizations, yeah, I feel like there are so many others that parents have started. Even I think there's somebody I spoke to that runs, it used to be Autism Kids, but now it's Autism International.
Mhm.
Rebecca Tarrant, who was a lawyer in her past life. Again, everybody has these prior professions and then eventually end up really building these things because they're much more passionate about it. But they use their knowledge from their prior profession to really inform kind of the organizations they're running. But yeah, bringing it back to also what you were speaking about, how it opened your eyes also, not that you didn't know about this, but about suicide. You mentioned that this is a topic that came up when you were traveling, how suicide is definitely more prevalent in the autistic population. I don't know the numbers exactly, but there definitely is rise. I know as of late in the last few years since COVID, there's definitely been an increase as per the research I've read. But there's a lot of anxiety and depression, which can lead to this. And so you're trying to combat this with
Right.
a colleague of yours, right? Are there things that you along the travels in other places that you found were facing the same kind of situation that you feel like, you can collaborate with, or any tips that they had in terms of dealing with this? I know every place is different. People are battling other things on a daily basis, not just autism, and every culture also has a set of challenges that is different than another culture day to day.
Right. So we do have an international community council
Mm,
was involved. So we've got a person from England, we have somebody else from Peru, and one or two people from Australia as well. And what I find is that wherever I go, autistic people are the same.
I was gonna actually ask you that.
Yeah.
How'd you know that was my follow-up question? I was gonna ask you, how does it feel being someone who's autistic traveling around? Do you still feel the same sense of identity? But I guess you just answered that.
Oh, yeah. It's the same wherever we go, and the parents are the same too.
Really?
Yeah, and they're just maybe different levels of knowledge, awareness, ideas behind what may or may not have caused the autism. But all parents want their children to lead fulfilling and productive lives, every last one of them. And every autistic person also wants to be successful,
Yeah.
which leads to another thing to keep in mind in terms of mental health.
Yeah.
And that is, if we think about, we know that there's a higher prevalence of mental health challenges in autistic people. And suicide being a mental health concern, there's greater rate of suicide in autistic people than the general population. And some people think that mental health challenges are directly comorbid with autism or co occurring, like perhaps autism and ADHD,
Right.
AUAD, and now it's referred to as.
Right.
And that's a situation where you can really say they're just running side by side with each other. One didn't cause the other. One didn't make the other one happen. One didn't come earlier. One might have been diagnosed earlier. And sometimes the two conditions, they combine in such a ways that it can be helpful, but also it could be challenging as well. But if we take a look at mental health, an interesting question to ask is if typical people had to go through the same challenges with the success in social interaction, academics, employment, and all other aspects of life that autistic people have, what would the rate of mental health challenges be in the typical population?
Uh,
Because we often find out that the mental health challenges occur, or we start seeing them a little bit later in life. Real common spot are the teen years.
yes.
The early teen years when the autistic or otherwise neurodivergent individual
Mhm.
begins to realize that life for them really is very different and more challenging than their classmates. And that could cause anybody to become depressed.
Yeah, and it's so that is exactly the population that the podcast is geared to. I mean, of course, we want to think about all the populations, but that's exactly
Right.
my area of expertise is with that population. What I always found is that that was also the time where individuals are trying to find their identity, and
Right.
suddenly, these teens and tweens are thrust into a situation where they're not really sure what their identity is because they don't feel like they belong with the neurotypicals, but at the same time they don't even know if some of the neurodivergent people are understanding them. So they feel like they're
Hmm.
not like they're kind of in limbo and that they've
Yeah.
expressed to me they don't really feel like they're in any community. I had somebody on this podcast, an audiologist, who said that she tried to join the sign language community, but because she had auditory processing disorder on top of the autism, so she thought,
Hmm.
oh, they'll accept her because she was using sign language as a coping mechanism, but the
Right.
deaf community she wasn't deaf enough for. The autistic community she wasn't autistic enough for. So her teen
Mm.
and tween years were plagued by what you're describing, this kind of identity crisis of some sort, coupled with not fitting in or not feeling like you have a place to fit in. And
Hmm.
teens and tweens can be, I mean, adults can be awfully challenging and cruel as well, but
Right.
teens and tweens definitely have a special ability to sometimes unintentionally just really, really hit you where it hurts.
Hmm.
And so this population I feel like is the most vulnerable. And is this something that you've seen as around the world as you've traveled on your most I mean all your journeys, especially your most recent journey and your future project, is this the age group that you feel like needs to be targeted the most in every area in the world?
Yeah, I think we need to be starting our work from before the tween years.
Mhm.
And just like with transition, So
Right?
often, at least in the United States, transition is mandated by the federal government to start at 16, which I think is way too late. Why would we only spend a couple of years trying to figure out the rest of the
Your life.
70% of somebody's life?
Yeah.
So perhaps if we just to peel away the one in front of the six, now it's getting better. We should start at age 6, but actually we should start as soon as we know someone's autistic or otherwise neurodivergent, and be following those abilities and strengths and be thinking about, well, how might that play out later on in life and potential areas of study,
Mhm.
vocation or avocation. And by the time we get to age 14 or 16, we're just finalizing those transition plans, not starting the transition plans. And if we do that with a recognition of abilities and strengths, uh, then we'll be much better off.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about it as you were speaking, and it's so crazy to think that that's when we start initiating counseling or
Yeah,
supports or things that, oh, well, this individual's struggling in this kind of way. They're having an identity issue, so we're going to now initiate supports to counsel them. Well, what if you started 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years earlier, just like early intervention in giving this kind of psychoeducation to the family and I mean, sometimes the parents are having a hard time coping with this and they're
right.
really not sure what's going on, but including the whole family in the psychoeducation as well as the child. And there was someone on this podcast, Marianne Diab in Dubai. You've
Mm.
inspired me to take this podcast global. So I've had
Oh,
people
good.
from
Yeah.
all over. Yeah. And I checked out some of those places you mentioned in Russia last time. But no, but it's really fascinating what goes on in the world and what people are doing in this area. And she, as a neuropsych, breaks it down for the children, no matter how young they are. There is a picture of a brain. After any neuropsych evaluation,
Mm.
everybody receives a picture of the brain, and she
Oh,
breaks
good.
it down into simple terms in terms of what is their brain. It looks a little bit different. Why does it look a little bit different? And goes into kind of these visual
Mm.
supports of how their brain acts differently and communicates differently than their neurotypical peers or than peers that may appear to look like they're communicating in the normal way.
Right.
But because their brain communicates in that way, they're able to do all these other things. And that's where they dive into their interests while also recommending the supports. But she said you can't recommend supports for someone and try to uh, devote your time to just inclusion without
Mhm.
the individual understanding why they're being included in this kind of way, why they're
Right.
getting these supports, what is going on. And it's so interesting because so many of them don't understand why they're getting the supports. And so the psychoeducation probably should start at a much younger age. So the individual reaches their teen and tween years and knows right away, oh, wait, that's me. That's my brain. My brain is telling me this. This is how I operate. I operate differently. And so I could and by then maybe they could actually really go into full gear of really using their strengths and interests without people coaching them on how to do it.
Right. And it starts early. I mean, I think people should know that they're autistic or otherwise neurodivergent as early as possible. And that conversation can start even as early as 5 or 4, and as long as you're able to communicate about such things. So you could say to the 4.5-year-old, remember yesterday you had a really hard time when the bus was late and you were waiting, and wasn't that horrible? And so you validate the feelings.
Right.
And you know why that happens is because your brain is wired differently. And that is what makes you so good at, and you just run down the list, but also can cause some challenges here or there, such as waiting, and it can make you impatient. But we have some strategies to work with that. And that's why your sister is so good at these other things. And comparing in that way. And that way, you're not using fancy words such as autism or neurodivergent. You don't have to, but you're getting
Right.
that young person used to the idea that they have a unique brain, which then can be supplemented with pictures, just like you were describing. And so by the time you get to the word autism, if that's what it is, they're now comfortable with who they are and why they are the way they are. And it becomes more of, oh, so that's what it's called.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I feel like this is something that we shy away from here. And a lot of times, even when they're teens and tweens, they still don't know what it is going on with their brain. Sometimes
Right.
parents choose different paths for their children or their teens and tweens, or may not want to acknowledge the child as being different because different sometimes to some people means bad. And obviously, we know better than that. We know that some of the most talented people have different brains. If we look at history, the people
Hmm.
that created the most interesting, fascinating things, Albert Einstein being on the top of the list,
Right.
did have neurodivergent brains. But circling back to the piece that you said about, we're covering a lot of morbid topics on this evening, but just in terms of the mental health at the component that really reaches this place that's so challenging. And then we speak about how we're trying to implement this. So I have a tough question for you. What about places, I had someone from Uganda on here actually. Cultures that actually view autism as a complete disability in which the parents did something wrong and there's witchcraft involved, and that's why the child has autism and they want to wish these children away, right? And
Yeah.
so I can only imagine how an individual, no matter what level they are, let's say they're at a level 1 of autism and they're getting these messages in their culture, which I know they're doing a lot of work in Uganda and other places to get away from that. They're building their first inclusive school in, I believe it's called Lire City in northern Uganda. But the reason why I mention this is because I think about some of these places and they don't have necessarily the same understanding of autism, even
Hmm.
though some people might have the understanding. The general overview that they're trying to get away from is that this is something that the parents did wrong, and that's why the child has autism, and it
Right.
is a disease, and we must get rid of this individual. I know that you can't solve this problem in the
Right.
next 10 minutes, but I'm just curious, from your standpoint, have you come across these these areas of the world
Mhm.
where they just have this very narrow-minded view of autism that's just embedded in the culture, and it's based on really spiritual, mystical things that have been going on for generations.
Right.
Have you encountered those places? I mean, clearly those places aren't gonna necessarily come to, and collaborate with you, but have you had any dealings with those cultures? Because I can only imagine how difficult it must be for anybody who starts understanding that they're different, that they were just a mistake, that they don't belong at all.
Yeah, well, I've more read about them than actually been involved in them. But, one thing to keep in mind, if you're thinking about different cultures, if you're thinking about a higher being, God, for example, you also have to ask, does God make mistakes?
Mm. That's a good one. I mean, I think that's a good answer because, again, there are so many people in these places that are trying to get away from this. There was a individual on here that works in Uganda that, and that's why it came to mind, that is building the first school of inclusion because they tried to get funding for these kids to go to school, and then the kids just would not be there anymore. They were kidnapped. So
Mm,
now they have full control, and they're almost done with building the school, the first school of inclusion, which is fascinating because it's modeled after all the things that you're doing.
mm,
Because it's in, like, for example, it's not just for individuals with autism, but for example, there's ramps there, so to make it accessible, they're making sure that there are specialized teachers that can specialize in specific things with each individual. They're setting it up in terms of a way where peers can collaborate with each other and socialize. So it's very interesting that they're using it. But yeah, I mean, I think of some of these places that there are voices there that are speaking on behalf
right,
of the autistic community, and they aren't necessarily even parents because a lot of the parents are fearful to speak up. So it's a whole
right.
different kind of side of the world, but they're individuals who just went through a lot and saw that they were being othered also just because
Hmm.
they lost their parents at a young age because it's a war-torn region, a lot of these
Right.
war-torn regions, and so they feel like they want to make life better because they've seen people in these places that they've been in. And then when you add the layer of autism or any other disability, then the person has an even tougher go around on top of being in a war torn situation. So I know that can't be solved, but I think you make a good point, which is, would God make a mistake, right? If you believe in a higher power, whatever that higher power is, even if it's a
r-
mystical higher power,
Right.
mystical higher powers, there are no such things as mistakes. So um, yeah. So yeah, I put a big one on you. I mean, I know that you're not gonna be able to conquer all these
Right.
places overnight, but I do feel like there is some hope in a lot of these places. I
Mm,
mean, it seems like you're traveling so much, and you may not be going to Uganda tomorrow, but in terms of just in general, in terms of the world, what is your hope? Like, I know that your next steps are to combat suicide. That's one of your next focuses. I know you're going to be a keynote speaker in March. I believe it's in March or April.
It's in March, yeah,
Yeah, at the
in March,
Autism
yeah.
International Conference in Germany, right?
Right.
Okay. So what do you envision to be the next stages of how you develop this autism advocacy?
Uh, Involving more autistic people. And we're beginning to see that as we're seeing increasing numbers of autistic people as experts in
And it,
various fields, whatever it might be. It might be education, it might be psychology, it might be speech language pathology, it might be OT. And I know some autistic people who are in these fields. And the more we can see autistic participation and then autistically informed support, the better off we'll all be.
that's yeah, I think that's a very good point of not just incorporating the autistic voice, but incorporating the autistic specialists that are
Right.
also in the field of, like you said, all those fields that support the autistic population because they themselves are living. And who better to support than someone who's been through the lived experience? You can't recreate someone who has been through lived experience through a support strategy. That is the support strategy,
Yeah.
right? The person themselves. And what's so crazy full circle, because I'm feeling a full circle moment, is I heard you back in 2012, and you were the first autistic advocate who you were back then, I believe, working at Adelphi as a professor, and
Yeah.
it was
Still am.
Smock-Polano in Brooklyn. And I remember that you had come to us with Zosha Zaks, I believe, who was also an
Yeah.
autistic advocate, and there was someone else there, I forget who it was, and the reason why you guys were there was because even in 2012, people were beginning to realize for the first time, I mean, it may have been happening a little bit before, but I feel like people were really honing in on the fact that we need to hear from autistic advocates that are specialists in the field. And
Right.
when we listened to your presentations, all of us got goosebumps because we felt like, wait, never heard from the adults before. We only were working with the young ones, the teens, the tweens, the children, and they had what to say, but we never heard from the people who went through all these experiences. So I feel like in some ways you were a trailblazer in this full circle moment to lead to this point where now so many people are speaking up, it sounds like,
Yeah, it's
around the
great.
world, right?
Yeah. And even at this the conference that we mentioned in Germany, and that's part of another round the world trip because I have presentations to give in Bangkok. So I'll fly west to go to Bangkok and then continue to Germany and then go home.
Wow. So you really just never sleep, or you
I
sleep
just
on the
sleep.
plane,
I
maybe.
sleep on the plane and I
Yeah,
sleep
that's what
when
it
I'm
sounds like.
riding downhill on my bicycle.
Oh, yeah, be careful with that one, right?
So that conference in March, to the best of my knowledge, there are going to be 4 autistic speakers.
Mm,
So I'll be one, I'll be doing the keynote. There's another autistic speaker who will be doing another keynote. There's another autistic person who's a professional in, I don't remember what it is, something might be education of some sort. And another autistic person who's also travels around the world and does advocacy, Bill Peters.
mm.
And so there's 4 already. There may be others that I don't know of yet, who I don't know of yet, but even those 4, and I suggested to the conference organizers that we do something to commemorate and celebrate all of the autistic expertise that we're going to have at this very conference.
Wow. So, I mean, is this open to everybody, this conference, or is it only open to professionals working in the field or
Anybody who wants to go can come to this conference. It's open to everybody. And now I got a frog in the throat,
oh, no.
and
Yeah.
I think it's going away.
Okay, good.
And you can, there's still openings, they're still accepting proposals.
Oh,
So the
nice.
papers is still open.
And this is from the Autism International Council, right?
No, it's actually from Novel Tech is the name of
Novel
the
Tech.
company. Yeah.
Another company. But that sounds so great. I mean, I think the big takeaway from all of this, from this conversation, is that you are traveling the world as you normally did, but the things that are changing include the fact that people are more aware of mental health than they've ever been before. You're
Right.
trying to combat that by starting earlier because you know how difficult it is. There's that sensory piece that for some reason still gets lost in translation with behaviors. And so a lot of times people want to change that. But even more importantly, with the cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity, is that when you travel around the world now, you are having autistic people speak more than ever. Autistic advocates who have lived the
Right.
experience that are sharing the keynotes, that are sharing the big presentations. Like you said, when you're going to Germany, there are going to be four of you. It seems somewhat historical in the sense that all these conferences now are not led by just people who work in the field or who are parents. They're actually people who have autism themselves and are specialists,
Right.
which just seems like things are shifting
Yeah,
in
and
a
it's
big
great to
way.
see that shift.
Right? Because I mean, even in 2012, I don't know. I just remember you guys were the first ones. You, Zosia, and someone else were the first people that we heard from, and it wasn't common that day. It was in the room in Schmalkolenu. You guys gave your presentation, and
Right.
we were just all wowed. And you shared the slides with me, and I reviewed them over and over. And it was just, yeah. So now it's so nice to see all these years later that actually it's taken off, and it sounds like now this is who we want to hear from because that's the only way we can change the way that we work with the individuals is by hearing
Hmm.
from what they want, what
Right.
their experiences are and everything like that. So before we log off, first of all, thank you so much for the part 2.
Oh,
And for
glad to do
anybody
it.
wondering, based on culture, there's going to be a part 3 because one thing that Dr. Shore and I share is our Jewish heritage. And Dr. Shore does a lot of work in the Jewish community, in the Jewish circles, as it relates to autism. Your identity is intertwined with autism and Judaism. Is that safe to say?
It's very safe to say. Yeah,
Okay.
safe and
Uh,
accurate. Yes.
okay. And so I can't wait for that part 3. Is there anything else that you want to leave everybody off with in terms of maybe just what you're most looking forward to in Germany?
Well, I'm most looking forward to presenting there and meeting my autistic colleagues. And I'll also send you the link to their website
Oh, amazing.
so that people can find more information about this autism summit.
Yeah. And maybe I should sign up and take
Yeah,
off
you
from
should
work
sign
and
in.
go.
Come to
Yeah.
Germany.
Because I was looking at it because you had posted it on LinkedIn and I
Right.
looked at it and I said, like, I've never been to one of these international summits before on autism. That's my area of expertise. Why don't I go? Like, what's holding me back? So
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
why not? If you're for anybody who's listening who's a professional in the field or even it seems like parents come as well. What better way to learn about autism than to be around people, experts who are living through the experience and have learned from the experience, are dedicated to it, and it's international, so it's voices from all around the world.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads to probably what is a good ending statement to sum it all up. And that is if you want to learn more about autistic people, get to know more autistic people.
I love that. So now I'm gonna have to coin this phrase too because your phrase comes up a lot. Your quote: "If you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism." People
Right.
keep repeating it. So now the next one is: if you want to know about autism, get to know more autistic people.
Exactly.
Love that. That's a perfect ending to it. Dr. Shore, thanks again for the part 2. I'm truly looking forward to sharing all about your contributions to the Jewish community, maybe even just some information on how this overlap occurs in the
Oh,
Jewish
sure.
community and autism, because I've seen a high prevalence of it
Definitely
myself.
an overlap going on. Yeah.
Yes. And so I've said it before and people have questioned me on that in my community, but there is. So I would love to hear more about that and safe travels.
Thanks.
I'm going to really look this up and do more research, but whoever's interested, sign up. Thanks
All
again,
right.
Dr. Shore.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.